Welcome to another Aftershock Jamon Moore. I'm here with Carlos Yustis. Carlos, I'm really happy to have you on. It's something I've been wanting to do for a long time. And you've been really busy lately and you got a lot to talk about. But there's some other stuff we want to definitely get into tonight. We're going to talk about Matias Almeyda, some of the stuff that's going on today. I believe you've got some valuable perspective that I think it'd be really great for some of the fans to hear. I know there was some back and forth on Twitter and stuff, but I want to get into some of that. And I want to get into Matias Almeyda as a coach and kind of understand a bit better, how people from Mexico and Argentina really feel about this man and get a little bit more about that and then get into other things. But before we do all that, how are you doing? How is your off season? Are you ready for another MLS season?
Yeah, I mean, off season is kind of an understatement in my case. I mean, I had my first son. I have a 6-week-old baby in the house right now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I obviously was covering the San Francisco 49ers. I work as the analyst in Spanish for the team. I went to Canada to cover Mexico, play Canada. So, that off season is usually just like pile more work and have a little break. Right now, we're cleaning the slate and starting with the Quakes again.
And you're doing a lot of work over at Telemundo. Got a chance to interview Francisco Calvo, one of the new players for the San Jose Earthquakes. But talk to me about the 49er gig. How did that come up? It's something new for this year, right? That's something that you just started with. That's got to be exciting. I was so surprised. I spent a lot of time down in Mexico back in 2018, 2019 in the Guadalajara area. And there are a ton of NFL fans that are in Mexico, and you're on the Spanish side of the broadcast and such. So talk to me about that and give me a little bit more about why Mexican fans really love the NFL.
Well, first of all, I think it's the fact that we've had football in Mexico forever. Some people don't know that, but we've had college football as an actual league since the 1900s. Quick example: if you watch soccer and Pumas UNAM, the team from Liga MX, Pumas UNAM wears gold and blue because the Notre Dame coaches came to UNAM and founded the team. So that's why Pumas plays in that golden navy. So it's just something that's always been there. And little by little, I mean, some games have gone to Mexico. Actually, the San Francisco 49ers were the first team to ever play in Estadio Azteca. They played the Cardinals in 2005. And they're going to be coming back to that. They just announced this year or last year to begin this year that there's going to be this marketing agreement where teams are actually able to use their image and likeness and all these things for the San Francisco 49ers in Mexico. So we actually had a very recent meeting with them on things that they want to do and expand. And the way that came to be, my dad, believe it or not, actually played football, like American football in Mexico. He played until he was in high school. We obviously don't have that. Didn't progress to college after that because he actually is an actor and decided to not do anything with sports. But he played American football. He played soccer, and he kind of like ingrained that on me. And we moved to Miami when I was 16 years old. So the first thing I ever did when I was like a 6-year-old, and it was the first time I ever went to Miami, even before we moved, I went to a University of Miami against FSU game at the Orange Bowl, and I fell in love. I was like, I'm gonna go to the U. Like, it's all about the U, and this is it. I also got to watch Dan Marino playing growing up, and then once I got interested, obviously, Steve Young, Jerry Rice, Joe Montana, and then Troy Aikman, Michael Irvin, and it kind of like grew on me. So it was always something I always liked. I never played it. My dad actually, because he played, he never let me play it, and I played soccer at a very competitive level. I played for Cruz Azul up to I was in second division. I played for the U15 national team in Mexico for a little bit. And so soccer was my life. I came to the U.S. I wanted to be a kicker. My dad was like, no, you're going to get injured. So I didn't do it. But I played flag football in college. And funny enough, some of the guys that I played flag football with ended up being college coaches. And we actually had a playbook and everything. So I had to have the 101 on like, this is how routes are done. This is the route tree. This is a base cover 2. This is how you cover in zone. This is how you cover in man-to-man. So when the opportunity came last year that the 49ers were looking for an analyst for the Spanish side, I was recommended by Carlos Ramirez, my partner in Telemundo 48, because he went on to do the Sunday night football games in Spanish for Telemundo at the network level. And we kind of like passed the torch. He was like, okay. And it's funny because actually the people who had been the sports anchors at Telemundo local in the Bay Area have had that job for the past 4 or 5 years. It was first Gabriel Sotelo, who was also had a relationship with the San Jose Earthquakes. Then it was Carlos Mauricio, and then it's me. So that's how the Niners came to be.
A lot of Carloses in there. So talk to me a little bit too about other coverage that you do at Telemundo, because you're going to go straight from the earthquakes to covering Chivas, obviously Matias Almeyda's former team. So talk to me a little bit more about like what you do from on Telemundo side with Liga MX as well.
Well, I basically have 2 jobs within the same company. I work as a sports anchor on the newscast day to day in the San Francisco area, in the Bay Area, every day covering the local teams. That's how my involvement with the San Jose Earthquakes happened. But also at the national level, I'm a reporter and analyst for some of the games. So I am the field reporter for a lot of the qualifiers for CONCACAF. I'm actually going to be traveling next month. I mean, everything permits, so hopefully to Qatar to cover the World Cup draw. I will be going to the World Cup in November to cover the World Cup. This will actually be my 3rd World Cup, considering I did Russia, France for the Women's World Cup, and this will be my 3rd one. So that's a lot of I do. And in that process, since I'm bilingual, the Telemundo reached out to me that they wanted to expand on the Liga MX rights they had with Chivas, that they wanted to do it in English. So they reached out to me and said if I was interested, and I've been doing it for 3 seasons now. And it was a dream come true. I mean, growing up watching Liga MX, playing on Liga MX at some level, even though it was 3rd and 2nd division, it's a dream come true to actually be able to kind of like be part of that, even if it's behind the microphone.
So you mentioned that you were down there playing 2nd division. Were you ever there at the same time that Matias Almeyda was at Chivas, or did he come later than that?
I met Matias in 2017 in McAllen, Texas. They went to play in Edinburgh. There's a lot of friendlies that happen in that area of the country. I think they played Santos in Texas. I was working as a sports anchor there. It was my first on-air gig, and I was, just like it happens here, I was one of the few channels that actually goes cover those things. So I spent a lot of time with them. I have a really good relationship with the people from the press area because of all the coverage that I do in other things. And I know some people. So they invite me over to one of the practices because it was an open practice. A lot of fans came to that practice. And I got the chance to talk to Matias for a good amount of time that day. And we even exchanged numbers, and after that, it was just a coincidence. I ended up landing here, and then he was here.
That's kind of crazy. And also, you guys you have your own kind of room for Telemundo where you do things with the earthquakes that I believe that's in the building that where all the team things are at. How do you utilize that room? I saw you shooting the Calvo interview out of there, and maybe tell us a little bit about for those of us English speakers who haven't gotten the chance to hear the Spanish side or get a translation of that. How did that conversation go? And you mentioned on your Twitter that Calvo came to the earthquakes because of Almeyda. I think a lot of people have this assumption that was a move that Chris Leach did really without much input from Matias Almeyda. Seems like don't really have that story straight. Help us out here. Tell us about all this type of stuff.
Well, the room that you saw, actually, the Earthquakes use it for a lot of stuff. It's actually open during the game days. They usually have the trophy cases and they do stuff there. It's not nothing special. But that's where we like to shoot the interviews, just because it gives it like some flavor to how it looks. It's obviously a controlled environment. You can put lights, you can move stuff. So I actually did 2 interviews. I interview Calvo, and I actually interview Chofis, and I'm gonna be uploading those 2 full interviews. So no editing, no nothing. So anything gets taken out of context, I'll be giving everybody the link once I have it. And with Francisco, one of the things that he was saying was exactly that first, one of the reasons why he came was because Matias was here. I'm not so sure if it was like Matias reached out to him directly, but I think what happens in this case, and this is something also that I saw yesterday, or I've seen this week, as I've spent some time at the stadium this week. Chris has a lot of communication with Matias. They have meetings. Sometimes they have. Yesterday, the press conference that it ran a little late was because Chris had a meeting with Matias. Right. That was the main reason why it ran late. So because of all those things, there's a lot of communication. Matias is very involved in the club in a lot of areas. Not only that, I mean, he's been pushing for a while, and he's been very vocal about it. He's been pushing for a while to expand the practice places and how to improve the gym. And now that they're going to have an MLS Pro next team, where are they going to practice? And that, to expand those things for the club in infrastructure. And, because the club is a club and the way it works, it hasn't happened, right? But overall, the dynamic that you see when you walk in from the team and the players with the coaches compared to what we see from the outside, it's completely different. I've got to see a little bit of it just because I happen to be there, and I have some good relationships with some people at the club, and we talk about it. And one of the things that Francisco was saying, he was very surprised, because if you think about it, Francisco Calvo is a player who, he's Costa Rican. He plays for the national team. He has World Cup experience. But when he goes to Minnesota United after playing a little bit in Denmark and then coming back to Costa Rica with Saprissa and Herediano, when he gets to the MLS, all his coaches have been English speakers, because he had an American coach and then he had 2 European coaches, right? And even though there were no native speakers, they spoke in English, and it's a European kind of setting. On Minnesota United and Chicago Fire. So he said on the interview that one of the reasons why he was really excited was that he gets to come to something that feels more like home, that is more like your culture. Matias has this idea of being actually very, very vocal with the players, talking to them, trying to keep the group together. That's the first most important part before even playing. And then on top of that, he was excited that it was Matias Almeyda who was going to be his coach. And he said he had a communication from the beginning, and he was very excited because there was some chemistry on how they saw things together. And we'll see how it works out, because at the end of the day, having a good relationship and how you handle things at the team, it's great. But on the field, everything can fall apart, because that's a whole different conversation. But that's always in hindsight, right? You can't know before it starts.
Yeah, Calvo's an interesting player because, he's been so excellent at the national team level, but a lot of the fans feel that he underperformed in places like Minnesota and Chicago. And it seems like he's one of those players who really kind of plays all out. And so when he does something amazing, you probably notice it. But also when he makes a mistake, you're going to notice it probably more than you would with other players. Sometimes it's very visible that it's a mistake, but he's a captain on these teams for a reason. And one of the things that I noticed in the preseason coverage that we were able to get is that he was talking in the huddle. I don't know if he's the captain or someone else is the captain. I mean, last year it was Jackson Newell for the most part, or Shea Salinas. But, he's got that captain experience, and he's talking in the huddle. People listen to him. What did you get from his communication skills when you talked with him? Because I have to imagine they're probably at a very high level for a player.
Yeah, and on top of that, you got to think that even between players, even you don't know him, out of everybody in the roster, he's the only one that has a World Cup under his belt. Costa Rica might not have done as well in 2018 as they did in 2014, but the fact that he can have that under his belt and he's very vocal about it, and just the way he expresses himself, the experience, the places he's been, it makes it change, makes a big impact. How the rest of the team perceives him, we're gonna see it. But I think that's one of the things that he wanted out of that player, and he kind of tried to do it with Osvaldo Alanis, but Osvaldo, it's a little more, even though he's confident and he's a very nice guy and he's very outgoing, he doesn't have the same tone that Francisco has. And even though Osvaldo has played Confederations Cup and he was with the Mexican national team, I think that was that little edge that they were missing in the back line, right? Because, for example, I feel like, and again, Matias has said it, Tanner Beeson has a great potential. I think he's a fantastic player, but he's really young, and there's still things that he doesn't have on full spectrum, and he's gonna learn them with time. So he could be that player, or he couldn't be that player. But it's tough, and especially last year when you have Wondo on the team, when you have Shea on the team, also those roles kind of change. Now that you don't have Wondo, that Shea probably is not going to be seeing as many minutes, you needed to have that guy on the field, and probably Calvo was going to be one of them.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were looking forward to the opportunity of seeing, Beeson and Nathan together because of the steps that Tanner Beeson has taken. I hope that Calvo starts off well if he's in the starting role, and I believe he probably will be at this point. because certainly I could see a lot of fans calling for Tanner if Calvo doesn't step up. So you're right. He's got these great skills. Hopefully we see him on the pitch, and the Earthquakes start off defensively very solid. That's, I think, going to build a lot of confidence for Calvo and Nathan and Yule back there. And we'll see that grow. Talk about Chofis a little bit. You talked with him. Obviously, there's a bit about his situation that's still in flux. We don't know if the Earthquakes and Chivas are going to decide to extend that loan. As of right now, it's the end of June. What are you kind of getting from Chofis in terms of his motivation level for the season, in terms of how he's approaching the whole situation? You know, how do you think his head is right now? Is it with the Earthquakes, or is it in his next move?
No, on the contrary, even one of the best bites I got out of the interview, and I'll share it too on Twitter, was that he literally says, I want to stay. I mean, right now I can only think from here to June, but I want to stay. And he even made the joke as like, can you talk to the owner about it? So he literally says, like, can you talk to the owner about it? Because he's been feeling at home in San Jose just because of the level he's playing, right? At the end of the day, you know, being in Chivas and having all those lights on you, it's great because it's the most popular team in Mexico. But it also comes with a lot of responsibility that he doesn't need to have here. And there's a lot of things that he doesn't have to do. Even though his Instagram the other day, he was like, well, I'm kind of bored. He would have never said that in Guadalajara because Guadalajara would just drag you out. So I think it's one of those things that are actually working in his favor. And if he was up to him, and again, he says it constantly, he's like, I want to stay here. I want to be here. Also because his relationship with Chivas is not the best. He doesn't want to go back to Guadalajara. So the next move will be like, well, if I'm going to move, then Chivas needs to loan me somewhere I can do well. But here, people love me. I'm doing well. I get offensive player of the year that he's never get an award ever. So he definitely wants to stay. And that's where his head is at. And I think he's done the progress to do it. Obviously Guido puts him in check with how fit you have to be. And he also mentioned how coming in last season, he didn't expect it to be as fast and physical, even though he heard about it. But once you experience it, you're like, well, I have to step it up on the physical part, because even though I have a lot of talent, it's not gonna be the best.
We'll see how it goes. It feels like he's going to compete with Jamiro Montero for minutes, at least out of the gate, unless Matias can move things around and find a way to get them both on the pitch. And I think there's ways to do that. But did you get any sense from him as to whether, that kind of competition with Jamiro for minutes is going to be something that concerns him, motivates him? Like, did you get to talk at all with him about, Montero coming in the club and what that might mean for him personally?
Yeah, well, I actually got to watch practice on Tuesday, and even though I cannot give a lot of details, because one of the reasons why they let me watch practice to not really talk about it is that they can actually, there's a way for them to be together. So I don't think he's as concerned about competing for the spot as much as making sure they can work together.
Gotcha.
And that's going to be for a lot of things. There's going to be some significant changes that we're going to see tomorrow. It's an experiment. I got to say like that. It's an experiment. There is things that they haven't tried before. But one of the things that Chofis said that it really grabbed my attention was the fact that he said that he's noticed Matias has matured a lot as a coach, because compared to what he has done with Chivas compared to here, he's like, I feel like in Chivas we had the roster with enough talent that there was some things that you could overlook, because there was games where it's like, we'll let them worry about us, and I'm gonna play like this, and they have to figure it out because we have the talent to break it. Here, he prepares every game for the team they're going to play. So there's a lot of things that are going to be rotating. And I feel in that sense, because also the season is so long, you don't really compete with minutes. You're going to, at some point, you're going to have a break and you're going to have to sit down. The problem is, and that's where Matias constantly says, right, that he doesn't, he was never going to have enough players, because you would like to have a pool so deep that you're like, okay, here's my first option, my second option, my third option, my fourth option. And in some positions, you have one second, and the third, you might have to go to it, and it's not going to be of the same caliber. So, and same caliber is kind of unfair. It's just maybe not as experienced, or there's a lot of things that go with that. But that's basically where the nuances is.
Hey, even David Beckham was complaining today that there's not enough talent depth in MLS because of the roster construction is hard. Oh no, having trouble with it. But how do you feel so far about the build for this season? of this roster, compared to previous seasons. Obviously, Matias lost, players, and he's been vocal about this. And I think some fans have reacted negatively. In fact, I even, posted a little bit about it myself, because it does seem to come off a little bit disingenuous to some level. And maybe we're getting the translations wrong or other things, and help us out if we are. But when he says things, and he said the same thing in Argentina as well, that we got 8 players, were let go, but only 3 are coming in. But of the 8 players that are let go, those are also draft picks. Those are also homegrowns. Those are also not top tier players. Yes, Andy Rios is a player that we know he likes and has experience with. Carlos Fierro, a guy that he's comfortable with. I thought Fierro had a good season last year. Unfortunately, just didn't play enough. Too often injured. Daniel Vega retired, but a player obviously Matias is comfortable with. And then the players coming in, he says, well, there's only 3 coming in. But in truth, there's been 7 players added to the roster. So how do you take a comment like that from Matias and kind of like justify that in terms of, why he would say that type of thing? Because it feels somewhat disrespectful to the players that are, coming in through the draft or coming in through some of those other mechanisms like homegrowns.
Well, when I watched the interview in Argentina, I watched the whole thing, and even the answer that he gave to Alex, I think what he means by that, it's that he's used to being in big teams, right? Like in Chivas, he was there and he wanted a player. Chivas will do their best to go get it. The San Jose Earthquakes don't work like that, and he knows that. So what he was trying to explain, for example, in that Argentina conversation, was like, they were literally asking, like, how did you survive in that league? That league is horrible. That's what they said. So he's like, well, it's a challenge that I wanted to have, because this team is nothing like I've coached before. Because you got to think, like, I'm in a team that does not spend the money. They don't go out and buy these Lorenzo Insigne, or Carlos Vela. We took out 8 players and they only brought in 3. So that's kind of like for you to kind of have an idea how the money works. And then he goes, but then at the same time, that's a challenge, because one of the things that I love about the team is having players from so many countries and being so it's so culture diverse. That makes me grow as a coach. It also makes me grow as a coach because I have to think better of the things that I have to do. So that's kind of like the whole context. It's like, yes, and we know that the team doesn't spend the money, because it's kind of like the reverse of what Guardiola would say. Guardiola, most of the time, they ask him like, oh, but you're so good. And he's like, I don't know how I'll be on a team that doesn't let me spend $60 million on one player, and then I want another one. They always bring them. I don't know how that's going to look like. You also need to take it with a grain of salt. You guys call me great, and maybe I'm not that great, but I work with what I have, and I'm lucky enough that I always work in teams that give me everything that I want. Matias is saying the opposite. It's like, I'm in a team that is not going to give me all I want, so I'm going to work to it, and I'm happy with that challenge, and we'll see.
But didn't he leave Chivas under some of the terms of that they weren't bringing in some of the players that he wanted? I mean, Chivas, and for the English fans who don't watch Liga MX, is well known for the fact that they only use Mexican players. Every other team in the league goes outside and gets players, international players. That's not to say that's better or worse. It just means that they're very true to their ethos and to their roots. But it seemed to frustrate Almeyda. So how do we reconcile the fact that situation, frustrated him here, but he would be okay with a situation here where he has maybe even less?
Because here, I think he knew that from the get-go. I mean, I don't think it was a secret. Like, he didn't come in and expecting to have David Beckham, and then they didn't bring anything. I think he came in knowing what he was getting into, and he was more interested in the challenge of where he is, or of the city and the lifestyle. And he was more interested in trying out that than the actual team. With Chivas, and it's something that happened to him in Banfield, and it happened to him in River. Sometimes the toxicity around the team, because there's a lot of buzz around it, no matter what happens, whether it's good or whether it's bad, it doesn't matter where it is, they're always in the news. And within the club starts making some changes, and they bring you in, because they bring you in as a superstar, and they bring you superstars as in the players, so you can compete. You win everything, and then the team that is supposed to be the biggest team in Mexico and is always be competing for trophies, because that's the difference. I think the MLS, because of how it's constructed, you can say maybe LA Galaxy will have that kind of pressure, but not even. Like, I don't feel that the MLS has these teams that are set up like, you're the biggest team in MLS and you always have to win.
You're expected to win every single year.
Exactly.
Maybe the people in Seattle are used to that by now because they make the playoffs every year. But besides them,
but even then, I feel like they do it because they do a good job within the system. But nobody goes out and says, "Oh, the Seattle Sounders, they're the team, they're the best team ever in MLS." Like,
but the fans don't know what it's like to miss the playoffs yet. So I always tell my Seattle, because I'm up here in Seattle now, I always tell my Seattle friends that, well, wait until you miss the playoffs. Let's see how loyal you guys are.
Yeah. So I think that's the biggest difference, and the same happened with it happens with River Plate. River Plate's even worse than that, than Chivas. It's the biggest team in Argentina, even though they have Boca. But if you tell a River that Boca is just as big as them, they will kill you. So they definitely have that idea. So what happened with Matias in Chivas was that, like, the relationship between him and the club started breaking, which is something that doesn't happen here, because at that point he didn't have enough control. He felt like he was just a pawn in the game that Chivas was playing. And that's where everything broke, and that's why he was gone. And one of the things that he likes about it here is that, and I said all the time, name-wise and project-wise, he's had 3 huge options that are not even close. And again, like, that might hurt some of the people in MLS, are fans of MLS, and there are fans of the San Jose Earthquakes. But leaving Cruz Azul on the table, that's one of the biggest teams in Mexico, and then has represented the team in Libertadores, and even almost played a final. He played a final against Boca Juniors and beat them in La Bombonera. It's not equitable to what the San Jose Earthquakes are today.
Monterrey, that they spend. Oh,
Monterrey will be that place where he can go, but the media in Monterrey as a city is so toxic that I feel like that was the first thing that Almeyda was like, you know what? I just got out of Chivas to come to this beautiful place where I walked into the grocery store and I had to tell the guy and the cashier is like, at least say hi to me, like, out of courtesy. To going to Monterrey where they were gonna literally do things like talk about his children, because that's the kind of media that they have in Monterrey. So he didn't want to be part of that. And then he just had Santos de Brazil. He had the national team from Chile. Like, there's a lot of places that if he wanted to be bigger, he would have gone. So I think that shows, to me, that's a commitment. He's like, I'm giving the commitment. This is not what I have back, but he knows it. And at the end of the day, it's just sometimes the pressure. And I feel the pressure is coming from the outside too, because the problem really with what we say is that if we say something like, oh, Matias said this, then he gets replicated on those countries. And that's when it's like, oh my God.
Oh, yeah. You're probably dealing with that from the Spanish side. We probably miss all that on the English side of Twitter, but I can only imagine like how much more you're seeing on the Spanish side of Twitter. Couple more things for you, because I when I went down to Guadalajara, and I had about 7 or 8 different trips there, like I mentioned, right before the pandemic, and unfortunately I was gonna probably keep going, but haven't been in a couple of years now because of the pandemic. But when I was down there, like, you say the word Matias Almeyda, everybody knows who he is in Guadalajara. He can walk on water. The man is one of the most famous people, literally, in Guadalajara. Talk about why he is so big, so revered there. Obviously, he won championships, and I do want to get into that a little bit with some of our remaining time here. But why is it that he is so big, superstar level in that city?
Well, Chivas being the second biggest team in Mexico, or the first one, depending who you ask, because them and America are like head to head in titles, in how many people follow them. We tend to say that in Mexico that there's no big teams in Mexico. Like, there's big teams in Europe, and there's big teams in Spain, right? It's Barcelona, Real Madrid. They're very far off from everybody else. In Mexico, we tend to say that they're popular. So Chivas and America are the most popular teams, are the most winning teams. But then Chivas got in this slump. They were bought by Jorge Vergara, which is this big industrial guy from Guadalajara, who had a company that's called OmniLife. And he decided to buy the team from the kind of work before that. It was built by a society of different, like, investors. It was like 30 or 40 of them that dissolved, and Jorge Vergara buys the team and says, I'm going to bring this team back to their glory days, which were in the 60s when they won like 6 or 7 titles in a row. So I want to build that team. So he comes in, he wipes off everything that was the ethos of Chivas before, in the sense of like branding, whatever. He makes the brand bigger. He builds a new stadium and takes it away from the stadium where they played forever, that actually their rivals Atlas plays at. He took the sponsor side of the shirt, and he started buying all these superstars from the Mexican league, and even some that were abroad, and bringing them back into the team. And he won the title in 2006. But then from 2006 to 2017, when Matias Almeyda wins, and think about it, this is the biggest team in Mexico, not winning anything for 11 years in a row, and having like, I think it was between, because the one thing that Vergara had, that he had no patience. So coaches went in and out of Guadalajara for years. So they actually went through 25 or 27 coaches in a span of 7 years.
Wow.
So if you really think about like what that meant, that's why Matias gets there in his first year and he starts doing really well. And then the second year comes and he wins every title that you can win in Mexico. He wins the league, he wins Copa MX, he wins Campeón de Campeones, he wins the CONCACAF, and plays Mundial de Clubes. So that's why, like, you know, Chivas fans were like, this is the team we want to be. This is the team that we're meant to be. This is Guadalajara. This is Chivas. And then after that, they sell the players and they start dismantling the team, and that breaks the relationship with Almeyda, and Almeyda leaves. So that's why Guadalajara didn't get bitter at Almeyda, saying like, oh, he's the one that started doing horrible. They were like, oh, the team stopped supporting him, and that's why he left. But he came back and they gave him the support. We'll be in the same place.
Let's talk about this dynamic a little bit of kind of the English and the Spanish. And I think the multilingual press conferences are great, but we are sometimes left, I think, with some things that come out of that work well in soundbite form, but are coming across in a way that are not really the way that things are intended. My perception of the dynamic, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, and I think it's important that the English speaking audience in particular understands the dynamic here, is that Augustine, his translator, does an excellent job translating. I think his skills over the last 4 years have also improved quite a bit in the way that he does translate. It was rough at the beginning, but certainly got a lot better. But he's also left with this very difficult task of trying to translate small bits of words and have it all kind of come together in a way that has meaning without necessarily knowing where Almeyda is going to end up. Mm-hmm. He's trying to translate this as it goes. And sometimes it comes out in this very literal, direct translation that I don't think is necessarily what's intended. And a lot of times what I hear is the Spanish speakers, and that includes people in our Slack and such, when they hear this, or sometimes when you do the live post-game show, people are like, well, he said this, but what he really meant was this. Can you speak a little bit from your perspective as someone who is bilingual in what you kind of observe in the press conferences?
Yeah, it happens a lot. And again, like kind of like making echo what you're saying, I think Agustin makes a fantastic job. I think he's super capable because what he does is really hard. Because a lot of people can say like, oh, he might want to do it, but no, what he does is extremely hard, and the fact that he can do it at such speed and the time. But I think one of the reasons why that happens to him too is because it's not somebody who just speaks English, but he's also Argentinian, so he kind of oversees some things, like what happened the other day. He translates it in his head because he understood it. He doesn't have the necessity of being like, you know what? If I say that, it's not gonna come out. Like he's like, oh, of course I know what he said because I understand exactly what he's saying, and he just said it. Which maybe if you were again, like if it was somebody who I don't know, maybe it was someone who's American that spoke Spanish, maybe it would be like, I don't think he meant to say that. But that kind of gets lost sometimes, and like you said, that break of the ideas and then like put it together. Once you use it, it also happens because you have the break. You have that specific grip and you use it and you use it in the in and out, and you miss a whole lot of the idea. And it is also like the moments where you find him, because that's another thing that was having is like somebody was telling me you can tell a lot by his body language. I was like, were you watching him practice? Because to me the problem will be if his body language is like that inside the locker room when he's talking to the players, then you're right. But that's the press conference. That's not how he speaks to his players. So unless I was getting that from the players, like, Matias not, which we're getting last year. Like last year, when the thing with his dad happened, he was really down, and the whole team had to work together to put him in a place where he could focus, because he was obviously heartbroken and he was not in a good spot, and he still went and tried to do the best, and he missed preseason because of that. So. Right. I understand that he will be on that space, but he's not in it now. That kind of broke a little bit. And when you see the dynamic of the team, you realize that it's like, oh, this is nothing. that face that you saw like this is nothing how he's behaving with the players. So it's those things together, because maybe he was in the same mood that he's with his players when he tells you things. You also perceive it different, but it's like, is the demeanor of like, well, I'm doing this because it's my job. I'm still gonna respect yours, guys, and I will give you an answer so you can use it. And then and then gets together, and then gets on top of that. It's I don't know what's a game in English, because we played it in Mexico. It's a broken telephone that you say something to some person, and then that person needs to pass it.
Yes,
and by the time you get to the fourth place, it's the message completely gone. I think like that's.
Sometimes that's happening.
Matias says that, and Agustin says it, and then the reporter puts it, and then it's so
now it's on its fourth leg of the whole thing. Well, talk about a little bit about that dynamic. And I know we're going to run short on time here. I need to wrap this soon, but you and I are both familiar with this. I've talked with Joel Soria quite a bit about this a couple years back when we were doing the Black and the Soul episodes. The type of media pressure that Almeyda is used to feeling from Argentina and from Mexico, now coming to the States, he has this kind of negative maybe perception, and maybe that's too strong of a word. I'm not sure what else word to use. Maybe you can help me with that. But he's got this kind of perception of media from those locations, and he carries that forward with him. Even though it's his fourth season, he still views media as not a chance to get his message out, but more like an obligation of something he has to fulfill because contractually he's required to by the league. What's kind of your perception of Almeyda? Because I think like that was one of the press conferences where we got obligation Matias, and it kind of came out a little bit more terse as a result of that.
I think one of the biggest things, like, it's also the mentality. I think in the US, you're used to like players in general, coaches in general, even since you're in high school, you get these press conferences, right? So you get these microphones in your face the whole time. So you get used to it, and it becomes part of the show. And a lot of players know when it's part of the show. Sometimes they don't feel like doing it, and they don't do it. They send somebody else. But there's always something. In Latin America, they're not used to that, especially in soccer. You're growing up, you never give an interview. Like, again, like I played third division, second division, playing international tournaments. Like, nobody ever put a microphone in my face, like, ever. So, and then on top of that, coaches, and especially Matias, who still, I will say he still has some ideas of the old guard, even though he's still in context a younger coach. Mm-hmm. They're very reticent to what happens inside the locker room stays in the locker room. Mm. Like, this is us, this is who we really are, and this is what the media says. And that's an idea that just permeates constantly through sports in Latin America forever. And I don't think that has been broken. Some players are learning little by little that the media is a vehicle for them to, make their own brand and things like that. But that's like the really younger players. Even when I was playing, it was like, whatever happens in the locker room stays in the locker room. That should never, like, you should never even like tell these stories to anybody who didn't play soccer. Got it. So one of the reasons why I know, and I noticed that, is because some of the relationships I have with the players, it's like that. They do tell me things, not in secrets, but like just the way like things are. And I noticed it's tough for the fans here because they're noticing a Latin American locker room in an American environment. So anything that happens from the microphone out that Matias does has nothing to do with what he does behind doors. And those are things that we might never know. And that's where that conversation breaks.
There is some, perception that's followed Matias, and I was checking some of the data today in Transfer Market, and just kind of like, from River Plate to Banfield to Chivas, now to the Earthquakes. One of the things that he has been just absolutely amazing at is winning cup tournaments. Anytime that he has to play for like hardware in a short-term situation, I feel like his brand of like all out, leave everything on the pitch, and go 100% of the time, it feels like it works really well in a cup tournament. But there is such a thing called Bielsa burnout, which follows Marcelo Bielsa, who's his mentor, right? And that's a real thing. And I did feel like in the 2019 season, toward the end, we saw some of that Bielsa burnout. But to your point earlier, Matias is also kind of like learning and progressing as a coach. he's never really been a great regular season coach, save for that one season that you mentioned at Chivas. His regular season records are not very good. But once he gets into the playoffs or like into like Copa MX or, in the States, that could be like the US Open Cup, or we talked before, MLS is back. He really enjoyed that tournament. That's where like things really kind of come on for him. It feels like almost two different Almeydas as a coach. What's your perception?
Yeah, definitely. And even if you think about it, in the Mexican League, we have playoffs and we're a short season with playoffs. So
Right.
and at that point, I mean, now we have 12 teams going out of 18, which is crazy. But when Matias did it, it was 8. So technically you could qualify 4th, 5th, which by numbers just quick in my head, that means that of the 17 games, you have to win 5 or 6. If you win 5 or 6
That's
games,
not that many.
That's not that many. You make it to the playoffs. And once you're in the playoffs, you're on.
He turns on in the playoffs.
And you need to win 2 games, because even though it's home and away, you just have to pass the quarterfinals and the semifinal. You already played in the final. So the Mexican tournament is also set up like that. And I feel like to your point, it's very obvious that yes, even though he keeps the players motivated, first the amount of work they do with Guido before the season starts, it's massive. There are some other teams that it is important to have your legs, kind of loaded before the season starts. To put it in a perspective, it is very important to do that work beforehand, because that prevents injury in the long run. But also when you overdo it because you want to have that high performance like all the time, there's a point where it's going to give out. And that's where the depth on the roster happens. And you can see it everywhere. I mean, I feel it's very noticeable, because in this case, Matias and Bielsa in this case, Bielsa has never been a huge club. He's never had at his disposition a Manchester City or a Real Madrid or a Barcelona, because even Leeds is not that team. Olympique Marseille is not that team. Athletic Bilbao is not that team. So it happens, and you see it with other teams too. It's like the peak starts going, and then all of a sudden it's like, that's it. We're gonna have to sustain it here, and it starts coming down. And when you have a deep roster like Guardiola does, and especially Guardiola plays, it's also the kind of soccer you play, because one of the reasons why those teams feel so dominant is because he has the possession of the ball most of the time, so his players don't get tired. And then on top of that, when they get tired, he can sub in, and the one that comes in is just as powerful as the one that just came out. So that makes a difference. But then at the same time, the motivation part of Matias and the all-out mentality is what makes him win in a playoff situation, which is what Guardiola has struggled with in the Champions League when he was in the Barcelona team. His teams are not built for that. So when things start coming into your face, they don't know how to push it back. So I think the numbers show it. And the problem is maybe not, because even the Argentinian league, is really short considerably. Even though it's 2 points, it's like the Mexican tournament where it's just, I think it's like 20 or 30, like 25 games and then 25 games. And in the MLS, you can't do that. The MLS has a huge break, and then it's so long that it's basically who can make it better by the end.
Assuming this might be Matias's last year, and this is my last question, we'll wrap here. Do you think then that, given that he just loves these kind of cup tournaments, that's one reason why he wants to become a national team coach, or at least that's the perception, is that that's what he really wants next? And it seems like he would be actually a really good national team coach, because he does have a knack for being able to be successful in those types of tournaments.
I will say, I don't know what's going to happen. I think the reason why he wants to be a national team coach is that in his head, that's like the natural progression of things. Mm-hmm. Kind of like you start in Banfield, which is not as huge team. Then you go to River, but when River was in La B, and then make it up. So it's kind of like that was his ascenso kind of thing, like kind of his relegation team, even though it was one of the biggest teams. Then you go to Chivas, which is an established team. You're trying here. Like I just think it's his progression of like, I've done it all. Like I know all the places where I can be as a coach. You're with a team that is not as powerful, and the roster is not as powerful, and I can make it win. I'm in a team that is powerful, and I can play for trophies. I can bring this team from the second division up to the first division. So the next natural thing is the national team. And it's also because South Americans are very proud of their country. So the idea of like coaching Argentina will be the maximum honor that you could get as a coach. And that's where it's at. The renewal and all that, I have no idea. I think it all depends on how this season plays out and where he feels about it. Because at the end of the day, one of the things that I know for a fact, and he's mentioned it a lot to us, is the fact that he's really happy here in life-wise, because at the end of the day, he loves soccer, he loves winning, but also he loves his family more. And he's found a place where he's so calm and he can actually just focus on soccer without having to have all these distractors that he has to fight all the time, even though it happens every once in a while, but it's not at the same level that he can do it. But also at the same time, if he came in with some ideas of like, oh, I can build this team to do this, and he doesn't seem that the team is going that way, that's when they will like mutually part ways.
Yeah, his father's death was tragic, and his mom obviously, in the hospital for a long time as well. But I feel that one of the things we did get to see with Matias Almeyda last year in some of the press conferences was a very human side of him. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated getting to see that. Carlos, thank you so much for coming on. And really, I think this was quite educational. I hope our fans think so as well. And I hope it gives them a good perspective in terms of Matias Almeyda, the person coming into the season, and also the other players that you mentioned, Calvo and Chofis, and really excited to get things kicked off. Hopefully we'll see you at PayPal Park tomorrow. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll be maybe talking soon.
Alrighty, anytime, you're more than welcome. And I enjoy the back and forth on Twitter. And like I said to somebody, because they were like, "How you're not taking this personal?" I was like, "This is my job. I love talking about it, and I can do it all day."
Thank you so much for the time. Take care.